Hello and welcome to NTD News Today. Kevin Hogan here. Let's take a look at our top stories. Locals in Louisiana helping each other cope with the aftermath of Hurricane Ida. We have some inspiring stories of donation efforts popping up in New Orleans. New York City experiencing huge impact from Storm Ida. Major transportation systems completely underwater and entire homes destroyed. The debate on Afghanistan has started in the House. Republicans are demanding answers about what went wrong during the chaotic and deadly exit, while some Democrats are saying that President Biden's actions aren't the only reason things turned out badly. Do you know how much the post-9/11 wars cost? A new study puts the total cost at $8 trillion. That includes the cost of caring for war veterans. And what's actually inside the election reform bill that Senate Democrats are proposing? Some provisions would automatically register people to vote, including illegal immigrants. Now an immigration analyst is sounding the alarm. Residents in Louisiana are pulling together to help each other out in the aftermath of Hurricane Ida. NTD's Jessica Beatty has more.
Volunteers are distributing food and water in New Orleans' Algiers neighborhood as the city copes with the aftermath of Hurricane Ida. City Council member Kristen Palmer is helping out.
We're doing food distribution here, as well as water. You know, that's a cooling bus, which has been great in case people need to get out of the heat. And they also provided the charging stations. But, you know, this is really basically about neighbor helping neighbor.
A local pastor agrees.
Say that it's literally locals helping locals. And if you've got a gallon of gas for somebody's generator and it's your last gallon, they're giving it to their other neighbor.
And one New Orleans bakery is also cooking up a lot of help. Owner and Army veteran Kelly Mayhew decided to come back Monday after evacuating his family.
And what we've done is, instead of wasting our product, we made like a little community closet and we're giving away everything.
As of Wednesday, about 1 million homes and businesses were still without power. The utility warned it could take weeks to restore service. Locals started bringing food from their blacked-out kitchens to donate.
I emptied the fridge and the freezer and donated the food to Pal's Lounge and Mayhew Bakery. With Katrina, it was completely opposite. It was a nightmare. People weren't coming together.
Resident Joe Anderson is grateful.
They're helping a lot of people in the community out by doing this, and I appreciate that.
Power was restored in a small sliver of New Orleans Wednesday morning. About 11,000 customers in a city of 400,000.
The power went back on. It felt so good. AC, you know, because I was suffering without no AC.
When I realized the power was on, it was a blessing.
The death toll rose to 6 Wednesday after 2 electricity workers were confirmed dead in Alabama. Pike Electric says they were repairing the power grid. Evacuees are being urged not to return home yet. Jessica Beatty, NTD News.
The U.S. House has started its debate on Afghanistan. Republicans are interested in how the war ended and are looking for answers about what went wrong as U.S. troops withdrew. Though the Democratic chairman of the committee is challenging the idea of putting blame on the Biden administration, noting that the Taliban put the U.S. in a difficult position when Biden took office. The House Armed Services Committee is working on setting the annual budget for the Department of Defense. In the meeting, Ranking Member Mike Rogers of Alabama said the way the Biden administration handled the withdrawal from Afghanistan was devastating.
The decisions that President Biden has made, or making, were disastrous. I fear America is less safe because of them. These self-inflicted wounds have made our job even more important and difficult.
Yet the chairman, Adam Smith, said it's incorrect to say that the only thing that went wrong in Afghanistan was what President Biden did. He said the Taliban presented a challenge by rolling across the country when Biden got in office.
If we're going to really honestly look at Afghanistan, we need to look at all 20 years. There was a lot that went into that.
House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy addressed the evacuation at a GOP foreign policy agenda in California.
As a nation, how are we going to live with ourselves by knowingly have an administration leave Americans behind? And it's not that Americans didn't want to leave. I can tell you, and young Kim can tell you, and every single member, we were working day and night, even yesterday, even today, where people were going to the airport because the State Department told them to and left them.
Biden has faced tough questions about how the U.S. pulled out and the evacuation that left 13 Americans and over 150 Afghans dead in a suicide bombing. This while the Taliban promised to give safe passage to those trying to leave the country, but many are skeptical, including the UK government and Senator Joni Ernst.
And I certainly am not one to trust the Taliban to allow for safe passage of Americans or those Afghans that stood beside our service members over the course of the past 20 years.
Biden said he chose to end the war to focus on other security challenges, including China and Russia. And he says he plans to continue counterterrorism operations, including threats coming from Afghanistan, but that this can be done with forces based outside of Afghanistan. People in Kabul are beginning a new era under Taliban rule, but they seem to have a new set of everyday worries. And long lines outside banks and soaring prices in the bazaars are just an indication.
The new era of Taliban rule in Afghanistan was marked by the departure of foreign troops, bloody attacks on civilians by Islamic State, and now an economic crisis. The country has a sinking currency and rising inflation. More than a third of the population lives on less than $2 a day. Banks, which closed as soon as the Taliban took Kabul, have now been ordered to reopen. But that means hours of queuing thanks to strict weekly limits on cash withdrawals. Many offices and shops are still shut, and some salaries have been unpaid for weeks, meaning even the relatively well-off are struggling to put food on the table. This man is a market vendor.
2 weeks ago, the market was good and people were buying, but now the situation's not good and no one's buying. And people's money's stuck in the banks and no one has money to buy anything.
This market in Kabul has been flooded with people desperate to sell their goods. Remittances from abroad have also been cut off, so many families are trying to sell jewelry or household goods, even if they have to accept a fraction of their value. Prices for vegetables were up to 50% higher, according to vendors, while petrol prices were up by 75%. Taliban officials have said the problems will ease once a new government is in place, but the structural problems run deep. The country has no significant exports to generate revenue, and aid, which accounted for more than 40% of economic output, has abruptly disappeared.
An Afghan television anchor made history when she interviewed a senior Taliban representative on the air. But around a week later, she says, her life turned into a nightmare.
She was the first Afghan female journalist to interview the Taliban after they took over control. Beheshta Agand quickly adjusted her headscarf when the Taliban showed up at her studio uninvited, 2 days after their takeover of the capital, Kabul. They demanded to be interviewed, and rapid-fire questions they received. Her live interview made headlines around the world. It seemed part of Taliban efforts to promote a more moderate face, as the group promised to respect women's rights. She says it was about a week later that her life became a nightmare. With the help of Nobel Prize winner Malala Yousafzai, she fled to Doha.
The women, the Taliban don't accept. So when a group of people don't accept you like a human, they don't have any good picture from you on her mind, on his mind. So it is so difficult.
Many of her colleagues had left the country despite Taliban assurances for women to access work and the freedom of the media. Agand says the Taliban ordered her employer, Tolo News, to enforce all women to wear a hijab, and that female anchors were suspended in other stations. She says the Islamist group also asked local media to stop talking about their takeover and their rule. Agand knew she had no choice but to flee.
So when there is no future for me, how can I stay in Afghanistan? How can I continue my job? I just want to become voice of my people, not voice of a group of people came and said, tell what we want.
Now in a temporary residence with her brothers, she says looking back, she realizes how much she loves Afghanistan and the profession she chose over her family's objections.
Now that the war in Afghanistan is over, let's take a moment to look at how much it cost. A recent study by Brown University is detailing both the financial and the human costs of the terror wars.
Brown University's Cost of War project is shedding light on the price of war It estimates that the total budgetary costs for future obligations for all post-9/11 wars total about $8 trillion. Around 930,000 people were killed, including 7,000 U.S. troops and almost 390,000 civilians. But why did U.S. troops stay in the Middle East for so long?
I think the U.S. strategy seemed to change over time and became a little bit confused. First, it wasn't nation building, then it was nation building, and then it was the Germans started by training the forces, and then the Americans took over training the forces.
But investments in nation building didn't seem to pay off. The news director for Afghanistan from the Associated Press says corruption was a big problem in the Afghan government, and that prevented good governance.
Opportunities and that were squandered, and a lot of signs that were ignored that allowed governance to deteriorate to the point that it did.
The $8 trillion include more than $2.1 trillion spent by the Pentagon, $2.2 trillion for future health care obligations for veterans through 2050, and $1 trillion in interest payments. But why didn't American taxpayers feel like they paid $8 trillion? A Harvard professor that spearheaded the calculation says that's because the wars have been financed via debt instead of taxation.
The remnants of Hurricane Ida arrived in New York City and tragically killed at least 14 people last night, and the death toll seems to be rising, with some reports of at least 22 people dead. Streets turned into rivers and apartments were flooded. NTD's Arian Pastar has the story.
The weather here in New York City is pretty much back to normal, but the aftermath of yesterday's rain is still impacting the city. Not so much above ground, but down there in the subway system, trains are having major delays after the rain flooded entire stations. Now, New York City has never seen rain like that. Just last week, I reported on Tropical Storm Henri, which already brought record rainfall of less than 2 inches within 1 hour. Now, Ida yesterday topped that with more than 3 inches within 1 single hour. The huge amounts of rain within a short period of time flooded basements, with reports of at least 14 dead in New York City. In comparison, Ida made landfall in Louisiana as a hurricane on Sunday, and 2 people died there. Similar to previous storms this summer, the New York City subway system took a huge hit. Water came shooting out of the ground, and even entire stations were flooded. In one case, as you can see in this clip, people had to evacuate through the subway tunnels to get out. And fire broke out in some stations. Governor Kathy Hochul chimed in on the storm too.
We were actually preparing for the Hurricane Henri 2 weeks ago, so we were already having the assets in place. So we're not inexperienced in this, but it is always quite shocking when you literally see the streets of New York looking like the rivers flowing and people just in shock of what's going on.
The situation above ground wasn't much better on Wednesday night. Cars and even people on bicycles were driving through flooded streets. One car on a street corner seemed to be floating in water. For the first time ever, the National Weather Service had to issue a flash flood emergency, which it describes as a threat to human life. Tornado warnings were sent out to people's phones, and a tornado did really rip through parts of New Jersey and destroy homes. Flash floods continue right now in southeastern New England, and after that the storm is forecast to keep on moving northeastwards into the Gulf of Maine. Arian Pastar, NTD News, New York.
Senate Democrats are proposing an election overhaul bill, but what's in it? Parts of the bill would automatically register illegal immigrants to vote and shield those that vote illegally. Let's take a look.
Senate Democrats claim that their For the People election bill would make it easier for eligible voters to vote. Formerly known as S-2093, parts of the bill would establish an automatic voter registration system. It would do so by authorizing various government agencies to share information. But that also means there would be no consequences for illegal immigrants who are automatically registered. What's more, the bill would also allow people to register to vote on Election Day without government ID. Instead, showing a student ID or signing a form swearing they're legally allowed to vote would be all that's needed. This would also enable illegal immigrants to register because many schools admit them. Other parts of the bill explicitly bar states from withholding voting availability from convicted felons, but its language doesn't explicitly outline voting for illegal immigrants. The Federation for American Immigration Reform, a nonpartisan organization on immigration, calls it a deeply flawed piece of legislation. Preston Hunnigans, the government relations manager of the organization, explains what the bill would do. It prohibits the prosecution of any illegal alien under federal or state law if that alien illegally registered to vote or voted in elections. It leaves no room for doubt. This bill shields and excuses fraudulent voting by illegal aliens.
Amtrak wants to spend its share of funding from the $1 trillion infrastructure bill on more than 50 new routes. It looks like the bill will allocate $66 billion to passenger and freight rail. But the new routes are a good bit slower than traveling by car between cities, possibly more than 40% at certain times of day. For example, going from Boston to Albany by train would take 4 hours and 20 minutes, more than an hour longer than by car. Routes between major cities will average speeds of less than 50 miles per hour. By comparison, new trains in Europe and Asia have approached 200 miles per hour since the 1960s. Amtrak didn't say why it's not proposing faster trips on its new routes. Authorities in South Dakota have given lawmakers documents related to the investigation into a fatal accident involving the state attorney general. Lawmakers will use the files to consider impeaching Attorney General Jason Rovsberg in September of 2020. Rovsberg told a 911 operator he hit something with his car that he thought was a deer. Turned out to be a 55-year-old pedestrian. The body of Joseph Beaver was found the next morning. Rovsberg agreed to a plea bargain that included no jail time for the accident. He was offered to pay a fine of just $500 plus restitution to the county. Governor Kristi Noem, a fellow Republican, said she was outraged by the sentence. It looks like Detroit's got a severe unemployment problem on its hands, at least according to a new study. An estimated 1/4 of the city's labor force is unemployed. NTD's Miguel Moreno has more on that study.
Detroit's home to over 500,000 people. A study from the University of Michigan estimates that the city's unemployment rate is at 25%. Looking at the data, the unemployment rate has slowly fallen from 27% in October to 25% this June, the most current estimate. As in many states, businesses like restaurants were bound to tight pandemic restrictions last winter, but they started to loosen up in February. Question is, why is Detroit's unemployment rate so high?
Many of the trends that are within the Detroit metropolitan area are reflective of what's happening everywhere.
Ira Wolf is the founder of Success Performance Solutions, an employee assessment company. He says a lot of businesses folded during the pandemic, hitting black and brown blue-collar workers hard. But Wolf says Detroit's in a unique situation because it's dependent on the automotive industry, which has been hurt by a chip shortage.
The other thing is Detroit's got a trickle-down problem. The car makers, and this isn't related to COVID, well, it's sort of related to COVID. Without chips, you can't manufacture the cars. Without a lot of the support, the other products that go into cars that rely on chip makers, they're laying off. So the automakers have slowed down production. A lot of their manufacturers, the supply chain has slowed down production. If they're slowing down, then people aren't eating out. They're not going to entertainment. They don't have they don't have money to spend.
The Labor Department's official data says Detroit's metro area had a 4.5% unemployment rate in July. The university says its study applies only to the city, not the metro area, which is home to about 4.3 million people. Miguel Moreno, NTD News.
Coming up, Robert Durst's murder trial is drawing to a close. The defense rested its case this week after 14 weeks of testimony surrounding the millionaire real estate heir. FX Network's Emmy-winning series American Crime Story premieres a new season centered around the Bill Clinton-Monica Lewinsky scandal. All that and more here on NTD News.
We're becoming more and more urban. We lose our connection with nature. This little girl lives in a world of natural beauty, nature all around her. Not everybody has this opportunity. Things are growing all around her, all sort of handmade things. The artist has portrayed a scene that is so comforting and so grounded that we can experience this ourselves. The artist himself has to be absolutely natural. And it's not easy to do because children are hard to paint. Birds are hard to paint. They don't sit still. This is quite an accomplishment, reflecting nature back to us. It's just a pure, natural painting.
Testimony has concluded in the murder trial of millionaire real estate heir Robert Durst, with the defense resting its case yesterday. The trial started in March of 2020, but was postponed for more than a year after pandemic-related shutdowns took effect. It picked back up in May, and since then, jurors have heard 14 weeks of testimony. 78-year-old Durst testified in his own defense for 15 days. Prosecutors say he killed his best friend, Susan Berman, more than 20 years ago. He did it, they allege, because he was worried she might implicate him in the disappearance of his wife, Kathy, last seen in 1982. Berman was killed just hours before she was set to speak with police about Kathy's disappearance. Durst was the subject of an HBO series called The Jinx. He has long maintained his innocence in Berman's killing, but he did admit to writing an anonymous letter to police telling them where to find Berman's body. Closing arguments will likely begin September 8th. The massive Caldor fire shut down tourism around South Lake Tahoe in California and forced tens of thousands of residents to evacuate to shelters in Nevada.
The sheriff came along and knocked on the door, said it's mandatory, you have to leave right now. So it took me a few minutes to throw a few more things together and close up the house, and I left. And it was starting to come down into the basin way up at the end of the canyon. And I'm just hoping they can keep it from getting to where I live. I'm very concerned. I don't want to lose my home and everything I have.
We were just waiting for the last minute until we got that phone call that we had to evacuate. We already had everything in the truck, so we just loaded up and came down here.
We were evacuated, and we came on the bus from Lake Tahoe down here to Carson City, and they've been quite kind, and they've given us what we've needed. So it hasn't been as bad as it could have been. We were evacuated due to the fire.
Favorable weather helped firefighters trying to save communities from the approaching Caldor fire, but officials warned that stiff winds and dry conditions mean that homes in the region are still in danger. The Caldor fire remained roughly 3 miles south of the recently evacuated city of South Lake Tahoe as evacuation crews tried desperately to keep flames away from urban communities. Houses that are close together, shopping centers, hotels, and other structures would provide even more fuel for a fire that has so far been feeding on trees, grasses, and scattered homes and cabins. Former White House intern Monica Lewinsky on Wednesday joined the cast and crew of Impeachment, American Crime Story, for the television show's Los Angeles premiere. NTD's Andrew Thomas reports.
This isn't about justice.
Then what is it about? Impeachment, American Crime Story, stars book-smart actress Beanie Feldstein as Lewinsky, Sarah Paulson as Lewinsky's friend Linda Tripp, and Clive Owen as Clinton, and dives into former President Clinton's scandal and subsequent impeachment. Feldstein said she developed a friendship with Lewinsky. They met in person just once before the pandemic hit and exchanged texts and videos.
Ryan called me in June 2019, and I didn't get to meet Monica until March 2020. So I had about 9-10 months to do an intense amount of research. And then by the time I met her, I just wanted to be, pals. It was more of just getting to know each other, being trusting and open with each other.
Lewinsky is credited as a producer on the series. She provided feedback on scripts and approved dialogue. Lewinsky began an affair with Clinton when she was 22. The former president initially lied about the relationship before apologizing.
I did not have sexual relations with that woman, Miss Lewinsky. I never told anybody to lie, not a single time, never. These allegations are false, and I need to go back to work for the American people. Thank you.
Clinton was impeached by the U.S. House of Representatives, but was acquitted by the Senate. The series also tells the story from the viewpoint of Lewinsky's friend Linda Tripp and Paula Jones. Jones accused Clinton of exposing himself in front of her when he was governor of Arkansas.
The three women at the center of our story, Linda Tripp, Monica Lewinsky, and Paula Jones, were ripped apart by the media. They were sort of a meal for the media and our society really to feast upon. It was all about their body shape, what they were wearing, the way that they sounded, the tip of their nose. It wasn't about who they were or their humanity.
Impeachment is part of the Emmy-winning American Crime Story series. The show previously depicted the O.J. Simpson murder trial and the murder of designer Gianni Versace. Impeachment, American Crime Story premieres on FX Network on September 7th. Andrew Thomas, NTD News.
President of the United States.
One of Thailand's wealthy elite is now speaking out in favor of pro-democracy protests in the country. But until recently, he was an ultra-royalist and marks a shift in the movement, which was mostly made up of students before.
29-year-old Nat has spent his life as a playboy in Thailand. He's the son of a real estate billionaire, typically parading around in supercars. And he has been an ultra-royalist for Thailand's monarchy most of his life. But he's recently had a change of heart. Nat, short for Tanat Thanakit Manoi, was a well-known face at protests that led to Prayut Chan-o-cha seizing power in 2014. Now he has flipped to join pro-democracy rallies in Thailand, in part because of outrage over the government's handling of the latest coronavirus outbreak. Nat takes to the stage demanding Prayut to step down and reforms to Thailand's monarchy, all in a fashionable suit.
It is clear, brothers and sisters, that the government, military, and those in power, as well as the pro-establishments, have been using the Article 112 to suppress those who have opposing views.
Article 112 is the royal defamation law. Thailand's economy has taken a hit under the coronavirus, and the death toll has reached nearly 12,000. The Deputy Secretary to the Prime Minister has defended the government's handling of the virus and told Reuters that they have taken all necessary measures to contain the spread of infections. That sparked new life into protests against Prayut that began last year. Nat was blinded permanently in his right eye last month after being hit by a tear gas canister at a protest. But he says the injury has only made him stronger.
Well, I guess we will have to just do whatever we can, whatever it takes and whatever it needs to be done. If it will cost me another eye, and so be it.
His presence at the protests marks a more diverse group joining the movement, which has largely been led by students. Nat said he has cut himself off from his family, and although some student activists were suspicious of his actions, now they raise the protesters' three-finger salute together.
Ireland hit the Facebook-owned WhatsApp with a record $266 million fine. That's after an inquiry into the messaging app's transparency, which focused on sharing people's personal data. WhatsApp said the fine was disproportionate and that it would appeal. Ireland's data privacy regulator said the issues relate to whether in 2018 WhatsApp conformed with EU data rules about transparency. The Irish regulator says European data privacy regulators instructed them in July to increase its proposed fine on Facebook. The Irish regulator also ordered WhatsApp to bring its data processing into compliance. The Irish regulator had 14 major inquiries open, looking into Facebook, WhatsApp, and Instagram as of the end of last year. Beijing is stepping up its limit on how many hours minors can spend playing online games. But gamers have something to say about the change. We look at how they're responding to the news.
Some young Chinese gamers are upset about Beijing's new rule. That is, no more than 3 hours of gaming per week for those under 18. A gamer in Beijing says he doesn't think the regulation makes any sense.
Although it aims to help teenagers, however, the less you get, the more curious you'll be.
He goes on to say that this isn't something authorities can control.
People, in the end, can always play on another account or buy accounts from adults.
Another gamer believes there's no need for Beijing's restriction.
Because the internet companies here are developing and gaming is part of it, I think if China resists it too much, it will restrain the development of talents.
Authorities argue the rule is necessary to stop the country's growing video game addiction. The regulation is also part of Beijing's efforts to tighten its grip on Chinese society, especially on key sectors like the tech industry. A Chinese professor says gamers will always find loopholes in the rules.
For example, account leasing, which means that adults rent accounts to young people, or modify mobile phones, or there will be human skin masks in the future. These are all possible. And in fact, what we see may be that parents themselves are willing to help children in the family unlock it as long as they have their permission.
Beijing's latest clampdown deals a major blow to the gaming industry. China is one of the world's biggest markets for video games. And gaming developers like NetEase and Bilibili saw their stock shares drop after the announcement.
Still to come, German train drivers are planning a third wave of strikes after failed wage negotiations. The country's rail company says it plans to take legal action. And archaeologists are discovering rail artifacts underneath an ancient Mexican city. Many of the objects are the first pieces of their kind ever found at the site. Stay tuned for more.
Is deep-sea fish oil really healthy? Due to pollution in the oceans, most fish contain heavy metal elements and radioactive substances. That's why it's so important to choose a pure source of omega-3. Puritang green vegetable omega-3 is made from purslane and perilla seeds, which are rich in nutrients and minerals, especially vitamins A, D, E, calcium, and iron. With natural processing and no harmful chemical additives, it has more than 90% concentration of omegas 3, 6, 7, and 9. It effectively improves brain power and is beneficial to the heart's health. Puritang omega-3 does not smell of fish and contains no pollutants, so both adults and children can safely and easily consume it over a long period of time. Puritang green vegetable omega-3. Eat 2 a day and you'll feel brand new.
Hi folks, Joe Namath here with a new message about your Medicare benefits. You may be entitled to transportation, meals, and expanded coverage for dental work that includes extractions, fillings, and dentures, all at no additional cost. Plus, depending on your zip code, you may be entitled to the Medicare benefit that adds money to your Social Security check every single month. Call and get everything you deserve. Call now. It's free.
I'm on a fixed income, so I called to get money added to my Social Security check. They helped me so much.
I called to save money on copays, get prescriptions, transportation, and my dental work covered. I couldn't believe I was spending money I don't have to spend.
Millions of people have trusted the Medicare Coverage Helpline, and you can too. Call now. It's free.
Call 1-800-764-1930. That's 1-800-764-1930 now.
People in Ontario, Canada will soon have to prove they've been vaccinated against COVID before they can access bars, restaurants, and other places. But some in the country's most populous province are already taking to the streets in protest.
Canada's most populous province will soon require proof of full COVID-19 vaccination before entering bars, gyms, restaurants, and more. After Ontario broke the news on Wednesday, several hundred people marched through the streets of Toronto in protest. Some carried signs saying, "My body, my choice," and "Make Canada free again." While Ontario Premier Doug Ford was initially opposed to the idea on the grounds that it would create a split society, he said the spread of the Delta variant made additional steps necessary. Later this month, people will need proof to enter establishments, and next month, that vaccine information will be stored as a digital passport on mobile devices. Ontario follows 3 other provinces in the country opting for the passports. It's an issue that's featured on Canada's federal election campaign, where Prime Minister Justin Trudeau regularly criticizes anti-vaxxers. His government last month said it would mandate many workers, including all federal public servants, to be vaccinated. Trudeau's opponents, however, have suggested rapid testing as an alternative to vaccine passports.
A wage dispute is still ongoing between a German railway company and the country's train drivers union. The company is now taking legal action against the union strike. Let's look at the details.
German railway company Deutsche Bahn announced Thursday that it will take legal action against the train drivers union GDL. This comes after the union rejected the company's pay raise offer Wednesday and staged a new round of strike across the country. Outside a local train station, the union leader addressed a crowd of applauding supporters.
They are repeating history, and they will lose again. That we can promise you.
The strike started Wednesday afternoon and will continue until next Tuesday. This is the 3rd GDL strike so far in August. It marks the longest industrial action amid an ongoing wage dispute with Deutsche Bahn. In a written statement, the company explained it's obliged to take the GDL to court in the interests of customers, as the strike has paralyzed a large part of the country's passenger traffic.
I'm starting my rehab today, and now I need to see how to get there. I'll have to change trains 4 or 5 times with luggage. I think this should be settled differently.
Deutsche Bahn said they had offered Wednesday what the union demanded before, a 3.2% pay increase, a COVID-19 bonus worth around $700, and a shortened collective agreement. The company accused the union of being driven more by politics than by a desire to improve work conditions.
Models and guests at Dolce & Gabbana's fashion show got a surprise this week when the runway was pelted by a hailstorm. The 110-look fashion extravaganza was held in Venice and attended by a host of stars. While the models soldiered on, guests ran for shelter. Video posted on social media showed audience members throwing up umbrellas and uttering profanities. The fashion house's chief designers braved the weather to walk alongside the models in the event's finale. Models attempted to shield their heads with their hands before embracing the adverse weather conditions, and many were seen throwing their hands up to take in the hailstorm. Statues, jewelry, and painted ceramics. Archaeologists are unearthing over 100,000 objects underneath an ancient pyramid in Mexico. They're allowing us to learn more about life in Mesoamerica 2,000 years ago. Let's take a look.
Teotihuacan used to be the most populous city in the Americas some 2,000 years ago. Now it's a top tourist attraction in Mexico. Archaeologist Sergio Gomez has been excavating the tunnel underneath the city's feathered serpent pyramid for almost 12 years. His team has discovered over 100,000 objects there.
They broadened the perspective of what we initially thought the tunnel was. When I started exploring the tunnel, I proposed that the tunnel must have been a representation, a metaphor of what the underworld represented in the cosmological vision, the world of the ancient Mesoamerican cultures.
The 330-foot-long tunnel leads to 3 chambers directly beneath the pyramid. Artifacts found there are believed to be religious offerings. Most of them are still intact. The amber receptacle, for example, is the first piece ever found at Teotihuacan. Gomez speculates it likely hung around a priest's neck. What surprised Gomez the most were 4 flower bouquets.
We do not know what type of flowers they were, but the bouquets are very well preserved. We were able to see some leaves, which will allow the biologists to identify what type of flowers were used for this ritual.
It's the first time ancient plant remains were found at Teotihuacan. The archaeologist says if they can identify the types of flowers, they'll be able to learn what time of the year the religious ritual took place.
This year, NTD will hold its 9th International Classical Chinese Dance Competition. We sat down with one of the competition's most recent medalists to understand what makes a dancer shine.
Since its inception in 2007, the competition has attracted some of the world's most enchanted classical Chinese dancers, including dancers from Shen Yun. Victor Lee from Shen Yun won silver last year. This is his 5th year competing, and it hasn't been easy.
The first time I didn't even make it from our school selection. I remember I kind of like cried. I kind of like ran out of the theater.
But that didn't stop him.
And then the 3rd time I joined, I got bronze. And the 4th time I got silver. And then, so I guess every time I'm just trying to push myself to improve, try to kind of compete against myself to do better.
His formula for success: persistence and a good mindset.
If you're positive and if you're really like cheerful all the time, that actually does affect me physically because our daily schedule is so like tiring and could be really stressful. So if you're kind of like depressed, or if you think that you're tired, it's actually gonna make the day a lot worse for you. But then if you stay positive and like cheerful, it kind of like helps yourself and your environment.
And he incorporates that into his dance style.
My style is more lighthearted, and I don't like to do like really angsty or like kind of like depressing dances. So I wanted to do like kind of like a lighthearted, but then still having like a good moral type of dance.
He said for dancers, it's important to make the movements grand and expressive. And what helps with that is one dance training he received at Shen Yun, Shen Dai Shou, or the body leads the hands, and Kwa Dai Tui, or the hips lead the legs.
From our innermost middle core area, we start our movements from here. So our movements have like a bigger range.
The once lost technique is deemed to be the most difficult of or the best in classical Chinese dance skills.
Because we prepare to go on stage, so we need to make sure that our acting and our movements is really clear to the audience, even though they could be sitting like very far away. So we try to make our movements as big as possible.
The technique also improves the dancer's ability to spin.
We think about spinning, not with our hands, but with our body. We try to rotate with our body to spin faster.
And enhances jumps and tumbling. The dance story Lee choreographed this year is about a novice archer learning archery from a Taoist cultivator. But instead of teaching archery, the Taoist asked the young man to meditate. And after that,
he finds out that even though he never practiced archery, he's suddenly really good at it. And then when he turns around, he sees that his teacher left. And that's when he knows that his teacher actually came to teach him cultivation.
Inspired by a Chinese fable, the story embodies the ancient belief that every trade is a way of self-cultivation, and it is through moral and spiritual improvements that one excels at his techniques.
Even though like a lot of the Chinese culture, Chinese morals are like thousands of years old, but I do still feel like they can still affect us now. So for Chinese like history, there's like thousands of stories that you can kind of look back. And a lot of times if we're going through problems, we can even look back in history and see if there's similar problems and how they were solved, or what could have been done better. And a lot of times we can apply that to ourselves.
If you want to watch Victor's dance and experience classical Chinese dance yourself, get your tickets for this year's competition at dance.ntdtv.com. The semifinal will be held at New York's Sugarloaf Performing Arts Center on September 4th, and the final on the 5th. You can also watch our live stream of the competition at ntd.com or NTD's YouTube channel. Thanks for watching. At NTD, we're honored to be your source for the news. Catch us again tonight at 6:30 Eastern. In New York City, I'm Kevin Hogan.
Thanks for watching us on YouTube. Don't forget to catch all of our programs on TV. NTD Evening News is on every weekday at 6:30 p.m. Find your local NTD